The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special edition of The Right Side. Today on the program, Dr. Anthony Fauci sat before the Senate. He took the fifth 111 times, and he refused to answer any questions. The most powerful public health voice of our lifetime chooses silence under oath. I'm going to look at what all of this dramatic fall from grace reveals about power and accountability and the end of an era in American life. Ladies and gentlemen, the right side is now upon you. Are you ready? Let's go.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.
We are not liberal snowflakes who melt away in the face of tragedy, adversity, and challenge. We are a covenant nation under God, and his divine providence is not dead and it's not gone. It is living within each and every one of you. And you will bring it to life in such a way that the world has never seen before. We never back down. We never give up. We march forward.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Every so often, a single day in Washington lays bare something that's been building for years, all right? Today was one of those days. Dr. Anthony Fauci walked into a Senate hearing room, took his seat, and within minutes began invoking the Fifth Amendment. He did it again and again and again, 111 times. The man who once upon a time spoke to the entire country with near absolute authority chose not to speak when placed under oath. The choice there is not a small legal technicality either. It's the public collapse of a carefully constructed image, and it represents one of the most striking falls from grace in modern American life. There's no doubt about it. I want that to sit with you for a moment, and I want you to contrast all of what I'm talking about for just a moment, because for more than 2 years, this was the face that appeared on television screens in nearly every American home. He stood at the president's podium. He told families whether they could gather. He had families arrested if they didn't mask up. He told workers whether they could keep their jobs. He told parents whether their children could sit in a classroom. And he spoke in the language of science and certainty, or so we thought. Millions of people ordered their lives around the guidance that came from that podium and from other interviews that he did. And today, when the same man was asked to explain the decisions that he made under that authority, he declined to talk about it. So that's not the story of a minor official who's been caught in some kind of a embarrassing moment. This is the story of the longest serving director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, a man who had appeared before Congress more than 200 times across decades of time and never before claimed the fifth. He cultivated the public identity of the impartial expert who simply followed the data wherever it led, a made-up persona. And that identity has now met the constitutional right against self-incrimination in full view of the country, okay? So when the official who demanded compliance from us, the public, when he won't even himself answer questions under oath, the distance between the persona and the reality becomes impossible to ignore. And to his credit, Senator Rand Paul had issued the subpoena that got Fauci in front of that meeting today. The questions concerned gain-of-function research, the origins of the virus, and statements previously made under oath. Dr. Fauci opened by accusing the senator of, quote, unhinged obsession, and by claiming that the hearing existed only to put him behind bars. And then the answers stopped. The Fifth Amendment began to rule the day. Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri noted that President Joe Biden and his auto pen had already granted a full and unconditional preemptive pardon covering Dr. Fauci back to 2014. The Supreme Court has ruled about 100 years ago in a case called Brown versus Walker that a pardon from a president removes the threat of federal prosecution for the covered conduct, and with it, the primary justification for claiming the fifth on those same matters. But the fifth was still claimed today, time and time again. And that combination of facts is very telling for us. Legal protection from prosecution was already in place for Fauci. He didn't have to plead the fifth. He's already been pardoned. What remained was the desire to avoid public examination of the record. You catch the difference there? A day before the hearing, okay, just yesterday, more than 1,000 pages of Dr. Fauci's his diary, his pandemic era diary, were released. The entries reveal that there's a man that we're talking about here who was deeply attentive to messaging, to public perception, and to the management of the narrative that they were trying to present. And those pages of the diary are now available for you guys to look at. Anybody can read them. The country can look at the diary. It can examine, it can look for itself to see whether or not this all makes sense. But still, when the formal opportunity to explain arrived today in a Senate hearing room, the response was silence. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what a fall from grace looks like when it happens in real time. It's not a sudden explosion of personal scandal in the classic sense. It's the steady, visible erosion of an authority that once seemed that it was beyond ordinary challenge. And the same institutions and media organizations that elevated Dr. Fauci into this figure of near unquestioned expertise now confront that awkward reality that the figure that they helped create is not going to answer basic questions under oath. The moral certainty that was once a companion of every public statement that he made has been replaced by legal caution now. And the voice that instructed the nation to trust the science has chosen not to speak when the decision made in the name of science are under formal review. So what does this moment actually represent for us? In my opinion, it represents the failure of a model of power that asked the public for extraordinary deference while offering very limited accountability in return. And that model treated dissent as dangerous. You remember those days? If you so much as dared to question anything that Dr. Fauci or the team put forth, you were dangerous. It treated skepticism as a character flaw, and it treated the concentration of decision-making authority in a small group of officials as a necessity instead of a risk. School closures that cost children critical years of learning. You remember these days, economic shutdowns, the purposeful destruction of economies that wiped out businesses and livelihoods, mandates that divided families and workplaces, and the systematic marginalization of scientists and commentators who raised inconvenient questions were all advanced under the banner of expert authority. We were all called kooks if we dared to question it. In fact, people like me, who had huge audiences over on YouTube, the entire channel wiped out because I dared to question the authority of shutdowns and the reality of what COVID really represented. When that authority is finally required to account for itself and it responds with silence, the model that they try to put forward has been now exposed. And the human costs weren't abstract either. They fell hardest on the people without the resources to cushion them. Working class parents watched their children fall behind while remote learning was an utter disaster. You can't learn remotely from grade school through high school. You got to be there in person. Small business owners lost enterprises and survived for decades. That had survived for decades. They were gone, wiped out. Patients died in hospitals and nursing homes without family at their bedside because of hospital policies that were written in the name of safety. I got out of corporate America as the VP of HR in a medical institution that owned and operated hospitals precisely because I would not write those kinds of policies. Young people were told that their reluctance to accept a medical intervention for a disease that posed minimal risk to them was a threat to the community. If you were under the age of 21 during the time of COVID, you were basically bulletproof for COVID. You might have gotten it, but you would have been like, whatever, shrugged it off and gone on. Trust in public health institutions has collapsed to levels that will not be rebuilt by any kind of a press release or branding effort. That collapse was earned by the gap between the promises of certainty and the reality of the results that we saw. Destruction, failure, chaos. Purposeful chaos thrust upon us by the radical left. And you know, my friends, the deeper lesson here is about the danger of placing any official beyond reach of ordinary scrutiny. Republics don't survive on the idea that some people are too credentialed or too well-intentioned or too important to be questioned. Expertise is valuable. We need people with expertise. Expertise that can't be examined becomes something else. It becomes a form of power that answers only to itself. And today's hearing did not create the problem that I'm talking about. It just made the problem impossible to deny. There's a long American tradition of watching powerful figures lose the public confidence that they once commanded. You know, what makes this case distinctive, though, is the scale of the authority. The scale of the authority that was exercised and the speed with which the public has withdrawn its defense of Fauci. The automatic trust is gone. The blank check that has been issued has been canceled. And what remains now is a clearer public understanding that those who make decisions affecting millions of lives have got to eventually face questions about those decisions, and that silence is itself an answer. So the hopeful reality is that the country has already begun to adjust, and I think it has. Citizens, you and me, average people who once upon a time accepted maybe official statements at face value, now read these primary documents for themselves. And parents who once upon a time deferred to school closure policies and school boards now are demanding evidence as to why they've got to do such things. Workers who once accepted the mandates without protest are now insisting on risk-based reasoning. And the hearing this morning is going to accelerate that adjustment, and that's a good thing. When the most prominent public health official of the era chooses the Fifth Amendment over an explanation, free people are entitled to conclude that the old relationship between the public and the expert class is finished. We don't need to hate anybody to learn the right lesson. I'm not advocating hate. We only need to insist on the standard that should have applied from the very beginning. Those people who claimed the authority to disrupt the lives of an entire nation have got to accept the responsibility of explaining their decisions in the open. Legal protections exist for a reason, folks. They don't exist to create permanent insulation from public accountability. The record is now being written in the daylight, and the public is watching it. And the public is no longer willing to look away from this. That's the meaning of the fall that we witnessed today. It's not just the diminished standing of one person, of one man. This is about the visible end of an era in which a single official could speak as if his word closed every argument. That era ended when the same official, Fauci, decided that the safest course was to say nothing at all. The country is better for seeing it clearly. And accountability, by the way, is not vengeance. Accountability is the price of power in a free society. On the right side over here, we're going to continue to look at the record without flinching, because a nation that refuses to look honestly at how authority was used will be far more likely to hand that authority over and over again to people who might corrupt it. The questions are going to keep coming. All right. The demand for answers won't fade away just because silence is more comfortable for those who once held the microphone. Free people are entitled to both the questions and the answers. Today made that entitlement clearer than it's been in years in this country, and I want you to remember that. I want you to hold on to it. Accountability. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, please remember to support the program. Share this out. Subscribe, follow. Head over to dougbillings.us, dougbillings.us, and prayerfully consider donating to the program over there. God bless you. God bless your families and all of the people in this world who you care about. We're in this thing together. Believe it. For the Republic. Cheers.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.